Thank you, Bishop. Again, if you have questions, write them on those half sheets of paper and put them in the baskets around the table. And we'll get to those. We're going to answer some qualifying
The
questions.
baskets are on the outside tables all around the room.
Okay.
Okay.
Fine, Melissa. And again, Bishop, thank you so much for the setup. Okay, my job is to report on the progress of 2018, this first year, and let's do that. Again, we're unable to increase the earnings of the trust beyond what we've done. The other side of the equation to preserve the balance in the trust is reduce the money coming out of it. The only two things to work on. We need to reduce the outflow of funds from the trust to a level that will stabilize the balance in the trust into perpetuity. As the bishop reported in 2017, the council directed that we reduce the drain on the trust by $1 million over the next 4 to 5 years. Now, my report to this meeting is about that progress. So as far as measuring this, if that happens in 2018, is the beginning of this, 2017 becomes year 0. That's when we start measuring things from. 2018 is year 1, 2019 year 2, and so on. So by 2022, at the latest, we want to hit that mark. Okay, so 2017, last year is year 0. In that year, our operating distribution was $3.8 million. We paid $275,000 in investment fees. So for just those two items, the total money coming out of the trust was $4.1 million. If we're going to cut that by $1 million, we need to drop that figure down to $3.1 million over this period of time. So 2018, our first year, and this is the progress. And we're actually quite happy with this, I am anyway. Our total budget in your packets, it's in your document, it's document number 8, I think, our 2018 budget. If you go to the back page of that, well, don't look at it now, pay attention to this, please. But the total expenses are over $4 million. However, out of our budget, we do have some income that doesn't come from the trust. We have assessments paid by the congregations, we earn some revenue. Remember I said that the perpetual trust pays for administration and accounting fees? That comes to us. The diocese does the accounting and the bookwork for the trust. They pay us about $65,000 a year for that, as a matter of fact. We also do the books for Episcopal Community Services and those kinds of things. So we have revenue coming in. So anyway, so out of the $4 million budget, we have $387,000 that does not come from the trust. That leaves us $3.6 million that we do need to cover from the trust for 2018. Plus, if we're looking at apples and apples again, our investment fees for 2018 are going to be $194,000. Remember, we switched firms in October, and if you notice that figure, it was $250,000, $60,000, $70,000. We reduced that by $80,000 by switching brokers. We probably should have done this some time ago. These are all good firms, but again, like any other business practice, every few years you should shop that out. I mean, it's a big deal to move this $100 million, $75 million portfolio from one place to another. And again, we have this $30 million loan against the portfolio. It was amazingly complex, and it's pricey to even get bids on it. But frankly, we needed to do this. And look, we're going to save $80,000 next year for that one action. It's a very good thing. Anyway, so 2018, so we end up with $3.8 million in 2018 outflows. So 2017, those two numbers were $4.1 million. 2018, $3.8 million. We've reduced the outflows from those two items in just 2018 by $311,847. That's a pretty nice down payment. So where'd that come from? Well, again, one nice piece of that. Now this is a one-time thing. We're not going to make this kind of savings repeatedly, but this one time, we're going to save going forward $81,000 in this year, and we expect in subsequent years for investment fees. The rest of that $311,000 in improvements comes from diocesan budget. Reduced staff, 1.5 staff persons. We've increased revenue from finance and communications. Craig is doing and finished a huge project documenting training for Title IV for the entire church. They're paying us for that. Craig generates great revenue this last year and this next year. And in diocesan line item things. Now the bishop says he had a discretionary fund with $200 in it. We haven't funded that in the budget for 2018. As part of our budget cutbacks, it's one of the things that we're not doing next year. So he's going to depend on contributions from congregations on the visitations. So $81,000 from the investment fees, $230,000 from cuts in the diocesan operations. And that's how we end up with $311,000 in savings in 2018. Okay, but we want to talk about the other things as well. So what else comes out of the trust other than the operating distribution and the investment fees? Well, we have interest payments on those Project Jubilee loans. If you have $20 to $30 million in loans, those interest payments are pretty hefty. We again have also taken out principal payments as well. Now the work so far is focused on the operating distribution and the investment fees. So what about those other things? Now we're going to look at everything that helps. Everything's on the table. We want to fix everything we can and make improvements wherever we can. The biggest outflow, of course, is the operating distribution. That's the money the diocese spends. That's the thing we have the most control over, and frankly, the heavy lifting is going to have to be done from our distribution. The rest of this is going to help, but that's the biggest piece of it. But let's look at the other things that take money out of the trust. And again, I've already said this, but in 2017, the trustees bid out the administration of the trust funds. We found a new person for that we've dealt with before in the past, and it's going to save us $80,000 next year. That's a great thing. Now, the operating expenses for the trust are relatively small, and they're necessary infrastructure. You have to pay for somebody to do the books. I'm glad it's us, frankly, but if you want to do something else, that's fine with me as well. Infrastructure, administration. One of my jobs is, last year Kathy Bryden retired, who had been recently the trust administrator and trust accountant. That work was given to two of our existing staff people, and so we saved that $70,000 right off the top. Stacy Shelton, our controller, does the accounting work. I do the administration work. When I talked about working with the investment houses and the trust, this $4.5 million loan payment we made this year on the loan, well, man, I got to send a letter to Zions Bank. They have to put it on their letterhead. I have to send it off to the trustees. I mean, it's a long process, but somebody has to do that work. So I do the administration stuff, and Stacy does the accounting stuff. And the loan payments are substantial. We don't have much control over that. The interest payments are what they are. We've got a loan contract like you would on a car. We make interest payments every 6 months. We don't have any influence over what that is, except paying down the loan reduces the amount. But other than that, frankly, there's no way we can't pay less than we can on the loans. And the principal payments are an interesting thing. The interest rate on these loans, there's actually 3 sub-loans of that $32.5 million. One of them's paid off now. But the average rate on those loans is right now 3.15 something percent. Well, if you have a portfolio that earns you 8%, how much of that do you take to pay off a loan you're only paying 3% on? I mean, there's sort of that thing. But I got to tell you, like any kind of debt, there isn't anybody I've talked to that does not want to pay that loan off. So what we've done in the past few years, matter of fact, that Bishop mentioned we paid that down from $32.5 million to $22.5 million. I think it's all happened in the last 5 years, hasn't it? I mean, it's in the very recent past. And in January, we made a $4.5 million payment to hit that $10 million down payment mark. So, but you know what happened in the stock market this last year? Man, this was great. So here we sit in January, the trust fund's at $80 million. Our goal is to maintain it at about $75 million. So we could take this $4.5 million payment and still leave the account at about $75 million. It was perfect timing, and that's what the trustees have done well. We don't have a schedule to make principal payments. We have this underlying desire and need to get rid of that damn loan as soon as we can. But again, you have the earnings thing where it's earning 8, 9%, and you got a 3% loan. But the way they've done it is when the market's done well, we'll make $1 million payment. Last year we made $2 million in payments. This January we made $4.5 million in payments. And frankly, it's worked really well. Next slide, please. And again, this is a restatement of that. The strategy of the trust has been when the market's done well, you take some money off the table, you pay the loan down. And this talks about the $4.5 million payment. Yeah, the rate, 3.15. I don't know how to get that many digits on there. And again, the strategic payments are when you have the market's doing well, you make those payments. Now look what happens. Again, in my focus, in my plans, we're going to work on the operating distribution. That's what we have control over. But anything we do with those loans going forward is all beneficial. This is not in my calculations for what my job is for the next few years to work on reducing the money coming out of the trust. But look what happens. That $4.5 million at that 3% rate will save us this year $142,000 in interest on that loan. That's a pretty good thing. On top of the other work we're doing, that's a nice piece. So yes, there is a benefit from paying those loans off. Now, my conversation with the trustees when we had this meeting was, we talked about making a $2 million payment. I'm thinking, well, okay. And then somebody said, well, how about 3? And I'm thinking, well, the market's doing really well. Do you want to take that much money out? Again, it's making more than the loan is. So then our bishop steps up and says, let's make a $4.5 million payment. And you know what? That works. The market has done very well. Let's take the money off the table. There was unanimous consent for that motion. We made a $4.5 million payment in January. It worked out wonderfully well. Anyway, so saves another 142 grand starting this year for interest payments. That's the end of my story.
What that means is that $142,000 that we're saving in 2018 because of the payment to the loan that we made in January, that means that as of this point in time, we've actually reduced the draw from the trust in the first year by about $450,000 when you add it all together. The $311,000 we already did, plus that moved together the $142,000 that was saved in 2018 because of that payment, and we're not paying as much money in interest, means that we managed $450,000 already, which is pretty good when you really reflect on that. So now Tyler Doherty is here. Please, Tyler.
Thank you, Bishop. So I was going to talk a little bit about the sort of implications for the budget cuts on diocesan grants going forward, and give you a sense of that process and maybe what to expect down the road. This summer, of course, we'll be, as council, taking the recommendations from the Finance Committee and adopting a budget for 2019. And council's clear that since the majority of the cuts so far have been on the diocesan side, so-called, that it's reasonable to expect that the congregation's share in the budget restructuring process going forward in 2019. Next slide. Just to remind ourselves of the sometimes invisible support we get from the diocese. It's a lot of stuff that's quite extraordinary, and by that I mean that doesn't happen in other parts of the church. Having our books kept by the diocese, access to a chancellor, communication stuff, TENS membership, all of that, I think it's important to recognize as part of the work that the diocese does for us as missions and parishes. They also supply 80% of clergy health insurance premiums. Again, very extraordinary in terms of what's going on in the broader church. And that figure as to how much the diocese pays out in clergy health care is right around $500,000 a year. Each year we, of course, give grants to mission congregations, and last year 16 congregations received close to $970,000, and 7 received no grant. There you see as well the highest and lowest grants from the diocese. As you know, there's also an emergency fund, so if your boiler, heaven forbid, blows up or your roof starts to leak, there's an emergency fund there to assist congregations with those kinds of emergency repairs. But the balance is quite small, and the aid is very, very targeted for sort of particular situations. In your packets, you'll see for each of your parishes, and this is probably something you can look at, outside of the presentation, but it shows the grant totals for the last 10 years made by diocesan council to the congregations. And it's interesting to note that from 2009 to 2018 to this year, there's been about, close to $500,000 reduction in the grants already, which is a positive thing that shows growth and movement towards self-sufficiency. In terms of the applications, Steve and I sent out a letter in May, I guess, and sort of by the end of July, we have most of the applications. Unlike the student papers I used to read, I don't throw them down the stairs and decide which ones, the top ones get the A and the bottom ones get the C, but we actually read every word of the applications. And I have to say that it's quite inspiring reading when you start hearing congregations talk about where they'd like to go, how they're following God forward. It's quite an enlivening and spirit-filled process, I must say. Canon Anderson is on the committee as the CFO, but the three members are Reed Stock, Lisa Jones, and myself. We get our budgetary directive, of course, from Diocesan Council. So they kind of give us the number, and it's our job to kind of figure out how to apportion those funds. And we make those decisions based on the funds allotted by council and then the expressed need, of course, of the congregation. Going forward, it's important to know, because you hear all sorts of stuff, that no number's been set by a diocesan council for the reduction in operating grants for 2019. I think it would be prudent, though, to expect some kind of reduction, and a 10% reduction with stepped reductions over time is probably something to expect. The council believes that the diocesan budget can't continue to support congregations at the same level, and that beyond 2019, we'll look for ways to reduce the operating grants, but also the health insurance subsidies. And right now, the thinking is that the health insurance subsidies will be reduced for parish churches only at this time. So how is this good news? And I actually think it is. And I would sort of draw on our experience here at the cathedral in the last year or so. Believe it or not, the cathedral is in a very similar situation to a lot of the mission parishes. A large part of our operating budget for many years has been paid by a very few people. And I kind of sometimes rather snarkily refer to us as a mission of our endowment. We've had very little stewardship, and kind of church is something that's been done to us. I'm kind of a passive consumers of our offerings here. And one of the things that I'm really excited about at the cathedral is that we're actually learning, in the absence of having all this stuff paid for us, what it means to be church for and with each other. Things like the whole reason the 79 Book of Common Prayer came about, the whole priesthood of all believers and the baptismal covenant. What does it mean to actually live into that? Who are the ministers of the church? To consider carefully what our time, talent, and treasure is, and how we can give that to the ministry of the church and God's mission in the world. To think seriously about what it might mean to reach out to the community and grow the church, to do the E-word, evangelism, and to move towards self-sufficiency is a terrible term, because as we're created by God, so self-sufficiency is, none of us are self-sufficient, but self-sufficiency in the way that we can cover our own budget, keep the roof over our heads, reach out and do mission in the community, and develop a sense of ownership over parish life. I thought I would end with this Philadelphia story where I was before coming out to Utah. In Philadelphia, you have 3 years as a mission. And if at the end of the 3 years you are not self-sufficient, you go back to being a preaching station. And so this idea of perpetual missions just does not exist in the Diocese of Pennsylvania. And the story that I've told around here a little bit is of the sort of last diocesan convention I was at. I think there's like 163 parishes or something. And there was a new mission church that was going to be welcomed into diocesan convention. We'll call it St. Swithin's in the Swamp. And the final requirement was that they pay their assessment to the diocese in order to be welcomed into the diocese at convention. The bishop got up and said, "I'm sorry to say, St. Swithin's in the Swamp was unable to meet their diocesan assessment payment, and therefore they're not going to be made a full parish in our diocese." And from the back of the room, this huge church, "I've got it right here, Bishop." Senior warden,
Wow.
check in his hand, literally ran up the aisle, slapped it down on the table, and then the entire church, probably 800 people for convention, the entire church let out a roar of joy, of jubilation. And it was a recognition of the hard work of, it means hard scrabble, South Philly, working class, people who say wooder, and lo and behold, they slapped their check down, and then with the little sort of handmade banner, this ragtag bunch of Christians, the newest members of the Diocese of Pennsylvania, came forward. And everybody, was just elated. There were tears in the room, and it was a very, very holy moment. And so I think that it's kind of a precious opportunity to what it means to actually learn to be church for and with each other. And that's what we're, I think, being called to live into. And I've seen it happen, and it's a lovely, lovely thing to watch. So I think that's it, isn't it? Yeah. Yay, okay.
So a couple of questions came in that need some clarifications. And again, please do put your name on the question, please. So that would be much appreciated. We'd like to know who actually is asking the question. Okay, so one question that was asked as a clarifying question is, what do we pay the investment firm Morgan Stanley for the service with the Perpetual Trust of St. Peter and St. Paul? And the answer to that is this year $194,000. Previous to that, we were the State Street Global, and our management fees from them was $270,000 a year, which you consider the size of the trust, those fees are understandable. Okay, so Morgan Stanley, $194,000. I'm not taking questions like that, please. Write your questions down. Okay, the next one question was also asked, how could we take $4.5 million out of the trust when we were restricted to only take 5% of the 4-year rolling balance? The answer to that is the trustees made the pool from the trust. The diocese is the one that gets the 5%. So in other words, it's the 4-year rolling average that determines the 5% for the diocese. So because of that, when the value of the trust was up at 82 million, when the 4 million was taken to make the payment, that number 82 million still remains as part of the 4-year rolling average. Okay, so as such then, so the trustees made that decision to make a payment. Over the period of time too, you should know that the trustees have put into place a debt reserve too, in order to be able to make payments. But again, that debt reserve and so forth is still considered part of the actual value of the trust. So it's that 4-year rolling average. So that question was asked.
The diocese doesn't pay anything.
Yeah, well, and again, please remember that the diocese doesn't pay anything. It's the trust that's paying it. Okay, the diocese, the trust is totally separate from the diocese. It was set up that way at the inception of the trust in order to protect both the diocese and the trust itself. And by that, in other words, because legally it stands separate from the diocese, should someone bring a lawsuit against the diocese, they cannot work the way back into the trust. Okay? So, the sole beneficiary of the perpetual trust is the Diocese of Utah. The sole beneficiary of the trust is the Diocese of Utah. You can go online and check the trustee document, which is online, and you can read it over for yourself. Okay? What are the terms of the loan at Zions? Interest rate 3.155?
Yes.
And what is the number of years?
It's on a 15, well,
Okay. This is a clarifying question.
okay, the interest rate, we have two different pieces to this loan now. The average rate is 3.1555. It's based on the 3-month LIBOR, so the rate changes every 90 days on that. What are the terms? The terms now are, it's a 15-year loan, interest-only payments. We make principal payments when we choose to. There's no structured payments. We recently renegotiated this. I should tell you some more good news. Just in the last 60 days, the trustees have renegotiated the loan with Zions, and we shaved them down another few points on the interest rate, as a matter of fact. So that'll be taking effect. We have options now to lock in a 15-year fixed rate on those, or a 5 or 10-year option too. Trustees have not made a decision yet. If we want to lock in repayments, we can do that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, and let me see. How have they performed versus the old managers?
What?
I can answer that one.
You-
Right?
go
I
for
can
it.
answer that. The question regarding the perpetual trust regarding Morgan Stanley versus State Street, how are they performed? At this point in time, it's about the same. At this point in time, it's about the same. One of the things that happened is that State Street Global went through a shakeup. And one of the pieces of the shakeup was that we lost the people with whom we were most familiar at State Street Global, who were giving us great service. State Street, let me just say that a $75 million trust inside of State Street Global is rounding change. It's pocket change. It's not big. Okay, and we were getting this great service from State Street Global because we had this relationship with these investors. And what happened is State Street Global had a shakeup and we lost those investors. And what happens in the market is usually you work with investors and you try to keep the investors if they're doing a good job for you.
Or investors.
Huh?
Advisors or
Oh, advisors, sorry, who do the investing for us. That shows you I'm not a money guy. Okay, and you should be thankful for that. I am a trustee of the trust. I say the opening prayer and say, now let's have the minutes. Okay, so now then, so they at this point in time about the same, but we've only completed that switch in the last couple of months. So it's harder to say what that looks like going forward. Okay, has the market always been twitchy The market is extremely twitchy, and ever since we started changing the way investing's been done, it's been very twitchy. And rumors, I don't see that changing. And the numbers, when were the numbers for today, 224, put together regarding the trust? When was that?
What numbers?
The value of the trust at this point in time?
That was the June 30th figure of the 74 million we based our income on. I mentioned too, we made a loan payment in January.
I can answer that question. If the figures were in June, we made, the high that the trust hit was in January at 82 million. Okay, then they made the $4 million payment, which brought it down to 78. Okay, so that, I don't go online and check the value of the trust every day. I like to sleep at night. So we have trustees that actually do that. Elaine Weiss does monitor that very closely. So I'm not one that is. So what is the stand at this morning? I can't tell you what it stands at this morning. But I should imagine it's probably in the $75 million range, given what's been going on with the stock market.
Almost precisely 75.
Okay, I guess Steve checked it this morning. It's about 75 this morning, Friday. Okay, but the market's been doing this, as you know. Okay, so those were and one more clarifying question. Okay. I think we just Steve answered the question regarding do we ever renegotiate the interest? We're talking to Zions Bank all the time. Okay, and then the other clarifying question had to do with the presentation that Tyler Doherty made. And the question was, does this mean that the congregations can expect a 10% reduction in their operating grant in 2019? The answer to that question is the council has not yet determined what that is. If the council had, then of course we'd report it. But the council is still talking about this, reflecting on it, looking at everything to see what it may or may not be. And then the other question that came as a result, on top of that too, was, is this going to continue? In other words, do we envision that the stepping down of the congregational grants will continue beyond 2019? The answer is yes. Yes. That is so. And we are continuing, of course, the study of the so-called diocese as well. Just because we did this year and made the changes that we did doesn't mean now that we've stopped, because that still remains the part of the ongoing piece to see what else might we do, what would be prudent for us to do as well. So please don't think that therefore everything else, the next $550,000, let's say, is all going to be congregations, because no. The answer is we're continually looking at that as we continue to go forward and study this. So that should be made clear, all right? We just wanted the first round to be done the way it was done. Okay, those were the questions. Another clarifying question? What steps has the diocese taken to increase non-trust revenue? Okay, one of the things that what Steve reported on is that the diocese took on the book work and so forth for the perpetual trust. So now the perpetual trust is paying the diocese for that work. That's one thing that has been done. We also, Steve reported that because of the excellence of Craig Worth and Haley, the Episcopal Church at large asked if we would take on a major project for them, and that has contributed income to the diocese as well in 2018. We continue to look at different ways of increasing revenue that we might have, and we're still in the whole process studying that whole question. Okay? Okay, so those are the clarifying questions. Again, other questions that you might have or comments you'd like to make, please do submit them. Whether or not we'll be answering other questions, it just remains to be seen. But if the question cannot be answered, then I'm certainly not going to answer, because I'm not authorized to do so, because it's something that council or standing committee has to deliberate, then I really can't speak for it. Okay, so thank you all very, very much. And now, let's see, Canon Nestler. Here, okay. Well, I'm sorry, there is one other question. I don't know all the acronyms. One of them was TENS. I'll be speaking about that a little bit later. TENS is the Episcopal Network for Stewardship. Okay. Also confused about the Project Jubilee loan paid back, and that is I think if we explain that. We are making payments as we deem it's time to make a payment by virtue of what the trust is doing. We are not on an amortized schedule at this point in time. The reason for actually trying to reduce what is owed on the loan is at a certain point in time, we may be hitting an amortized schedule. If that is the case, it behooves us to have that amount to be as low as possible in order that it doesn't impact the budget of the diocese. So the more that we can do that, we save money by the reduction in interest payments, as well as if we're making those payments per year at $32.5 million, it'd be a lot more than it is at $22.5 million. If we can bring it down further, we can, because when that does step in, then it would not so much adversely affect the budget of the diocese. Okay, thank you. Mary June.
Thank you, Bishop. Would you all please take the blue half sheet that is on your table, one per person, and if you don't have enough, raise your hand. Rhonda can bring them to you. Or you can put two people's answers on one blue sheet. Okay, but we do have some coming round. Keep your hands up till you get one. Great. Please use a phrase or a word or an idea. There's no need to write a paragraph or a page. And kindly, would you help us understand what you have heard this morning and what we on the diocesan staff can do better in communicating with you about?